In 1991, Donald Trump walked alone through his office in Trump Tower. He had just signed papers that officially left him with over $900 million in personal debt. Headlines said he was finished. The press buried him. Banks avoided him. No one wanted to be the last to fall with him. But he wasn't done. This is not a political story. It's a financial story about how someone can fall into the abyss and find a way to rise again. Donald John Trump was born in 1946 in Queens, New York. His father, Fred Trump, was a successful builder of affordable housing. Donald grew up watching his father negotiate, build, expand. But he didn't want to be just an heir. He wanted to make his mark. In Manhattan, with overwhelming ambition, he convinced banks to finance his biggest dream, Trump Tower, a luxury building on Fifth Avenue. It opened in 1983 and became a symbol. It was gold marble mirrors. And Trump, during the 80s, his name started appearing everywhere. Hotels, casinos, airlines, even a board game. He was the businessman of the moment. Charismatic, controversial, omnipresent. And behind it all, a man playing at the edge with leveraged debt in the 1980s, Donald Trump, seemed unstoppable. His name adorned skyscrapers, casinos, hotels. He was the symbol of excess and success. New York's golden boy, but what rises can also fall. And in the 90s, Trump faced the biggest financial crisis of his life. The real estate market, his playground, began to collapse. Why? The U.S. economy was entering a recession. Interest rates rose in the late 80s, making loans more expensive and cooling real estate investments. Commercial properties started to lose value quickly. Banks that had previously lent freely began to tighten their terms. Add to that stricter tax policies and an oversupply of luxury properties in cities like New York and Atlantic City. It was a perfect storm, and Trump was at its center. Suddenly, his paper empire began to crumble. He owed over $3 billion. Just to banks, he had more than $900 million in personal debts. Some of his casinos were bleeding cash. His airline, Trump Shuttle, was a financial disaster. His Atlantic City hotel was operationally failing. Worst of all, he had no liquidity. He couldn't even pay interest without selling assets. The press tore him apart. Headlines were brutal. Trump collapses. Casino king in bankruptcy. Banks wanted no more excuses. They wanted their money. So what did Trump do? For weeks, Trump barely slept. He locked himself in his Trump Tower office, going over numbers until dawn. His marriage to Ivana was already strained, but the financial stress accelerated everything. Arguments were constant, even in front of staff. Once, an assistant overheard Trump yell, "I'm not going to let them bury me alive in my own city." His father, Fred Trump, was also concerned. Not about the money, he had his own businesses, but about the family name. "Donald, you're putting the Trump name on everything like it's bulletproof," he said. "But if one of those falls, they'll all fall with you." That warning stuck with him. Then Trump did the unexpected. He gathered over 70 banks. It was a risky move. He was on the brink of collapse, but he knew the banks were too. If he fell, he'd take billions in financial assets down with him. The meeting was tense. Some bankers looked at him with disdain. Others didn't hide their frustration. But Trump spoke with a mix of urgency and cold calculation. "If you destroy me now, no one gets paid. If you let me operate, we all have a chance." It was an uncomfortable argument, but an effective one. They offered him breathing room, payment restructuring, extensions, even the chance to keep key assets if he met strict deadlines. Trump hadn't saved his empire, but he had bought time. And for someone like him, that was enough to start rebuilding. With time on his side, Trump focused on cutting costs, shedding unprofitable assets, and most importantly, protecting his image. He began working more from the shadows, making calculated decisions. He sold his luxury yacht, the Trump Princess. He sold his airline. He renegotiated contracts. He even agreed to a supervision plan with the banks that limited his spending. For a man used to total control, it was humiliating, but necessary. During his crisis, Trump faced monthly payments in the tens of millions just in interest. At the worst moments, he faced due payments of up to $65 million a month. The income from his casinos and properties barely covered operational costs, and many of those businesses were losing money. The banks, knowing that Trump's bankruptcy could shake the financial system, allowed a restructuring. In return, they imposed strict conditions. Trump had to report his financial moves, cut back on his lifestyle, and liquidate key properties for immediate cash. He was also temporarily removed from executive roles in several of his companies, though. He kept the symbolic title. Rumors swirled that he had drastically cut personal expenses. Some employees noticed he no longer ordered fancy dinners daily and spent more time in the office than at social events. There were even stories that, for a while, he started eating fast food more often, not out of taste, but because it was what he could afford without raising red flags among banks monitoring his spending. At home, the tension remained. His relationship with Ivana ended in divorce, but Trump began to surround himself with new allies, more aggressive lawyers, more creative accountants, and more loyal executives. He wasn't the same. He was more guarded, more methodical, more ruthless, and little by little. It worked. He managed to retain control of several casinos, restructured the Trump Organization, and by the late 90s, he was a millionaire again. Not by luck, but because he survived where others would have been wiped off the map. The most striking part wasn't that Trump recovered. It was how he turned his fall into an asset. Instead of hiding his failure, he made it part of his narrative. He wrote books, gave lectures, created a public persona that was a mix of businessman, celebrity, and survivor. And then, of course, came The Apprentice, the show that catapulted him back into pop culture. With his now famous phrase, "You're fired, Trump sold," the image of a ruthless tycoon. But behind that character was a man who had already been defeated, and who had learned to use failure as fuel. Today, there's plenty to debate about Trump, his politics, his ego, his choices. But one thing is undeniable. When many wrote him off in the 90s, he reinvented himself, and that might be one of his smartest moves. Because beyond the money, beyond the skyscrapers, what Trump proved is that sometimes the greatest power an entrepreneur has isn't to win, but to rise again when everything seems lost.